Hello, you're joining us again in the weekend edition of Into Vietnam, which summarizes the most outstanding business news and expert ideas on the economy in the week ending April the 6th. And here are the headlines. Vietnam GDP may grow 13.6% in 2025. The VMC buys approximately 4 trillion dong of non-performing loans in the first quarter. This week, Business Talk takes a close look at the risk facing Vietnam GDP growth with the participation of Mr. Dominic Miller, the country economist at the Asian Development Bank in Vietnam. Let's begin with this week's figures. According to Professor Robert Rollins from Harvard Kennedy School, Vietnam will enjoy strong economic and trade expansion if the country signs the Trans-Pacific Partnership Agreement, with gross domestic product growth seen at 13.6% in 2025. He said that Vietnam exports and gross national product will grow faster than other TPP participating nations, given tax barrier removals by large markets such as the United States and Japan. Vietnam's GDP growth rate may reach 13.6% in 2025, much higher than 0.4% of the US, 2.2% of Japan, and 6.15% of Malaysia. Meanwhile, Vietnam export will surge by 37.3%. Vietnam's economy expanded by 5.42% last year. The GDP in the first quarter grew 4.96%.
The current non-performing loan ratio, as reported by the credit institutions, fell sharply to about 3.6 to 3.9%. However, according to the central bank's assessment, this rate remains at about 7%. Earlier on February the 18th, 2014, Moody's released the Banking Outlook Report in 2014, evaluating the non-performing loan ratio of the banking system must be at least 15%. Shortly after, the central bank replied that non-performing loan ratios of the whole system had been significantly reduced to 3.63% of total outstanding loans, and if calculated prudently, including bad debts restructure under Decision 780, the non-performing loan ratio was about 9%.
According to the General Statistics Office, Vietnam retail sales and service revenues are estimated at 701.4 trillion dong, or $33.4 billion in the first quarter of this year, a year-on-year rise of 10.2%. The figure made the retail and services group among those sectors with the highest growth rate in the first quarter, up to 607.9 trillion dong, or $28.9 billion, equivalent to 86.7%, was contributed by the non-sector. Meanwhile, 68 trillion dong, or $3.2 billion, or 9.7%, came from state-owned sector. The remaining 25.5 trillion dong, or $1.2 billion, was from the foreign invested sector. In March alone, retail sales and service revenue stood at 233.1 trillion dong, or $11.1 billion, representing respective monthly and yearly rise of 2% and 10.1%. Coming up next is some major macroeconomic and investment news. As of April 1st, 2014, the Vietnam Asset Management Company has bought 3.9 trillion dong of principal non-performing loans from credit institutions. According to Mr. Nguyễn Quốc Hưng, the VMC Vice Chairman of Member Council, in the first 3 months, the company has bought 169 debts from 10 credit institutions, including a state-owned credit institution. The total amount of 3.9 trillion dong was bought by issuing special bonds valued at more than 3 trillion dong. Since its inception, the VMC has purchased a total of about 42.8 trillion dong of principal debts from nearly 40 credit institutions. The total value of special bonds issued has been 35.4 trillion dong. Under the 2014 plan, the VMC will buy 70 trillion dong of bad debts, including 10 trillion dong in the first quarter and 20 trillion dong in the second quarter. According to the State Bank of Vietnam, total lending expanded 1.35% in March compared to February and 11.59% from the same period last year. The SBV attributed the slow growth of credit to seasonal factor and weak absorption capacity of the economy. However, credit growth in March has supported economic growth and showed targeted credit growth at 12 to 14% in 2014 is entirely feasible. According to the central bank, in the context of low credit growth, credit institutions have increased investment in government bonds. Specifically, from the beginning of the year, credit institutions have bought about 83% of G-bond issuances. Growth in the Vietnamese manufacturing sector regained momentum at the end of the first quarter. Both output and new orders increased at faster rates than seen in the previous month, and the new export orders returned to growth. According to an HSBC monthly Purchasing Manager Index report released on April the 1st, posted 51.3 in March to signal a modest improvement in overall business conditions. The reading was up slightly from 51 in February and pointed to a seventh consecutive monthly improvement in operating conditions. Solid new order growth was recorded in March, with the rate of expansion quickening to the strongest in 5 months. Panelists reported a general improvement in demand across the sector. Growth of new orders led manufacturing firms to increase production for the 6th month running. After striving for months to prepare the ground for an ambitious trade and investment deal, Vietnam and the Customs Union, Russia, Belarus, and Kazakhstan will complete their 5th round of substantive talks by April the 4th. This round is of great significance as it finalizes the legal foundation for the agreement and has broken through the key technical barriers for which the parties were at an impasse. In this latest round, the parties focused their discussion on hammering out the key trade issues, including rules of origin, customs-related issues, sanitary and phytosanitary measures, investment, government procurement, institutional legacy, and dispute resolution procedures. In addition to reducing the imposition of taxes on imports and exports, the agreement is expected to specifically offer more favorable conditions for cooperation in the banking and transportation sectors. It's forecast the FTA will help Vietnam and Customs Union members achieve a significantly higher trade turnover, predicting it to rise to over $10 billion by 2020.
Ho Chi Minh City officials has announced that total investment from international sources in its 15 industrial and processing zones surged to $244 million during the first quarter of 2014. It is reported that currently the industrial and processing zones are 64% occupied and have roughly valued 1,300 projects with a total planned investment in excess of $8 billion. The projects grossed the record-setting export turnover of $959 million during the first quarter. Ho Chi Minh City aims to prioritize investment in 4 key sectors: food processing, pharmaceuticals and chemicals, mechanical engineering, and electricity and electronics that help boost the city's economic restructuring process. Of forecasting manpower needs and labor market information has estimated the city's second quarter labor demand at 75,000 employees. The center's report on employment trends shows enterprises' demand for the workers with basic to intermediate skills accounts for 35% and 38%, while university graduates and those of higher education levels make up only 27% of the total demand. According to the statistics of the Ministry of Labor, Work Invalids and Social Affairs, as many as 72,000 bachelors and masters were jobless last year. This shows an imbalance in labor supply and demand in the country.
In its Asian Development Outlook 2014 report, released in Hanoi on April the 1st, The Asian Development Bank forecast Vietnam's economy to rise slightly following economic recoveries in the United States, the Eurozone, and Vietnam's progresses in addressing weaknesses in domestic banking sector. Vietnam's inflation in 2014 is estimated to stay at 6.2%. Changes in assumptions or unexpectedly large price increases for subsidized goods and services would generate higher inflation, which is forecast to average 6.6% in 2015. The ADB says accelerating progress on resolving non-performing loans requires setting firm targets and closing the gap between national and international standards. The report also discussed the potential of PPP to be considered as an efficient approach to developing physical and social infrastructure. It pointed to date private investment in such crucial infrastructure has been limited. Also, the favored PPP structure often departs from standard international practice, and most projects have not been awarded through competitive bidding. However, the ADO commended the government efforts to develop a single legal framework for private sector investment in infrastructure, which is more conducive to facilitating PPP transactions. At the ADB launching of Asian Development Outlook 2014 report, the VITV reporter had a talk with Mr. Dominic Mellor, the country economist of the ADB in Vietnam. He affirms the dimmer than expected economic condition for Vietnam in 2014-2015 period, as the number of risks are looming in the future. Mr. Dominic Mellor, thank you so much for joining our program today on VITV channel. Shall we start with the outlook for Vietnam's economy and the potential level of growth for 2014-2015 period?
Sure. Our forecast is for the GDP growth to recover slightly, continue recovering from last year was 5.4%. We expect it to pick up to 5.6% and then 5.8%. The main reason we expect the growth to pick up is because of the support on the fiscal side, the fiscal easing, and also we're seeing committed disbursements from FDI, also supporting the construction and manufacturing industries to pick up off the low base. But still the economy remains below the potential because we are seeing domestic investment quite weak as with the ongoing banking sector restructuring, and also consumer demand is very weak as well. And on the inflation side, we expect inflation to remain subdued because of the weak consumer demand, and we also expect inflation exchange rate to remain stable because of the strong FDI and remittance flows.
You have mentioned that Vietnam posted the record low Q1 consumer price index in the first quarter of 2014. That has got some concerns over the low consumption demand and its potential negative impacts on economic growth. What's your take?
The inflation is low because of both external and internal factors. But yes, I think there is a concern that domestic demand is very weak, and that the State Bank of Vietnam's monetary policy measures to try to boost credit growth through high liquidity and reductions in interest rates so far haven't had that effect. And we think that it's probably because it's not a supply side problem, that it's more the demand side problem.
What should be done to boost Vietnam consumption demand and economic growth?
So, like I said, I think we need to work on the demand side. So what I mean by that is that for example, in Vietnam, a lot of businesses are first-generation household, informal sector businesses. And sometimes they don't have business management skill that allow them to go to the bank and to apply for a loan to access credit. So I think the government need to try and support over the medium to long term those kind of business development skills for the general public. And also the other issue is on the collateral. The commercial banks, the way they assess risk is still based on traditional method of assessing collateral, and sometimes it's very difficult for these small household rural businesses to put forward the necessary collateral to access credit. So I think also we need to look at the way commercial banks assess their risk may need to be changed to consider for these types of informal household businesses.
Apart from low consumption demand, what are the risks facing Vietnam in the future?
Well, the other risks to the short-term economic growth are on the external side, like if the world economy, for example, China is continue to slow to hurt to the global demand, which would hurt Vietnam as an export country. And then domestically, the main risk is around the ongoing non-performing loan problem in the banking sector. The government has taken a lot of measures to try and address them, but they still exist, and there's a lot of work still to be done.
What about the PPP or the infrastructure in Vietnam? As you
Okay,
said
yeah, quality of infrastructure in Vietnam is lagging behind other countries in the region. And as the labor cost in Vietnam increase, it's important that Vietnam can close the gap on its infrastructure if it wants to remain competitive. Yeah. And the new PPP law that the government is working on this year can potentially facilitate transfer of finance, technology, and expertise into infrastructure to improve the inclusiveness and quality of social and physical infrastructure in Vietnam.
And finally, what should the government do in short and mid-term to boost economic growth?
The short term, they have to continue to try and close the gap between the domestic and international standards of regulations. So, whether it's on various factors such as, competition laws, intellectual property rights, ensuring a level playing field, and the way that you account and measure NPLs, the disclosure policies of state-owned enterprises. They need to close that information gap. Into the medium-term challenge is to ensure that these regulations are actually enforced adequately. You cannot having quality international standard regulations is just the first step. Then you need to ensure that they are enforced. And the only way to ensure they are enforced is to increase the capacity of oversight agencies or overlooking SOEs in the banking sector so that they are in a position to enforce the new regulations.
And thank you so much for joining our program today.
You're welcome. Thank you.
And now some foreign trade news. We continue the program.
Oil product exports are expected to hit $490 million in March, bringing the total for the first 3 months of the year to $1.4 billion, up 20.1% against the same period last year. The Ministry of Agriculture and Rural Development also reports that oil exports to the U.S. and China increased 19.85% and 57.88% respectively for the first quarter of 2014 compared to the first quarter of last year, accounting for 52.89% of the country's total export value. The Vietnam Timber and Forest Products Association said the wood processing sector aims to achieve a target of $6 to $6.2 billion in export turnover this year due to its bright prospects. Last year, export turnover of processed items increased over 19%, gaining $5.5 billion. Vietnam paper exports jumped 29.4% in volume to 49,000 tons and 32.3% in value to $331 million in the first 3 months of 2014 compared to the same period last year. The Ministry of Agriculture and Rural Development reported that 25,000 tons of paper worth $170 million were shipped abroad at an average price of 3% higher than the same period last year. The US, Singapore, and India emerged as Vietnam's largest paper consumers, accounting for 43.63% of total market share. According to the Ministry of Industry and Trade, the country is currently the world leader in terms of paper output and export volume and plays a key role in stabilizing the global paper market. The Vietnam Paper Association predicts the country's paper output may reach 120,000 to 125,000 tons by the end of 2014, posting export revenue of $900 million.
By the end of 2013, the retail market in Vietnam had continued the 5th consecutive years of stagnancy. Some optimistic experts say the cycle of boom and downturn often lasts for 5 years, so they hope for the recovery of the market in 2014. The proposal to expand the scale of real estate business for foreign individuals and organizations, as well as Vietnamese overseas in the revised draft law on real estate business, is considered to be a positive change in policy to create favorable for foreign firms to enter Vietnamese market, diversify realty products, and boost the development of the market.
The real estate investment and business activities in general, and the real estate investment and business activities by foreign investors in particular, are encouraged and protected by Vietnamese law. Accordingly, foreign investors who want to participate in real estate business must have certificate and business license, the same as domestic investors. However, when the foreign investors implement their projects, they must meet tougher requirements.
Về nguyên tắc là nhà đầu tư nước ngoài khi mà thực hiện một dự án thì họ phải chứng minh khả năng của họ về tài chính, về nhân sự để đủ có khả năng thực hiện dự án đó với cơ quan nhà nước. Và nếu trong trường hợp mà họ không có khả năng thực hiện dự án thì đương nhiên cơ quan nhà nước sẽ xem xét đến cái việc là rút cái giấy phép đầu tư của họ. Còn trong trường hợp mà khi mà dự án của họ đã thực hiện xong rồi thì họ có thể là tùy vào cái chức năng và công năng của dự án, họ có thể là bán các sản phẩm của dự án hoặc cho thuê lại. Cái đấy là tùy thuộc vào cái mục đích và công năng của dự án. Nhưng tuy nhiên tôi chỉ nhắc lại một lần nữa là nếu họ chưa thực hiện dự án thì họ không có cái quyền nhượng lại một cái dự án mà đang chưa thực hiện. Bởi vì lúc đấy thì đương nhiên là cái giấy phép đầu tư của họ sẽ bị cơ quan nhà nước xem xét hoặc là có thể để bị rút và để chuyển những dự án đó cho những cái đối tác khác, những nhà đầu tư khác mà có năng lực hơn.
In addition, at present, foreign individuals and organizations and Vietnamese overseas are not allowed to re-rent the construction projects which they are renting. One of the new points of the draft law on real estate business is expanding the business scale for foreign individuals and organizations. Accordingly, they won't be allowed to invest in housing and construction projects for selling, renting or leasing, to rent houses and construction projects for re-renting, to invest in infrastructure projects on rented land for re-renting, and to rent land use rights with infrastructure for re-renting.
Tôi cho rằng là cái chủ trương mà để cho Việt kiều hay nhà đầu tư nước ngoài tham gia thị trường bất động sản có lẽ cũng là một trong những cái cứu cánh ở thị trường bất động sản của chúng ta. Và chúng tôi có trao đổi với một số Việt kiều cũng như là một số nhà đầu tư nước ngoài thì người ta cho rằng là ở các nước thì vấn đề sở hữu bất động sản tương đối là cởi mở. Vì với một cái quan niệm rằng là dù ai sở hữu thì bất động sản nó không, vì nó là bất động sản cho nên nó không thể di chuyển được. Dù người Pháp, người Mỹ, người Việt kiều mà đầu tư vào bất động sản thì bất động sản nó vẫn nằm đó. Nếu đầu tư vào bất động sản Hà Nội thì nó vẫn muôn đời nằm tại cái vị trí đó. Hay là thành phố Hồ Chí Minh hay bất kỳ đâu trên lãnh thổ Việt Nam thì nó vẫn là bất động sản. Chính vì vậy thì chúng ta cũng nên cởi mở trong các cái đối tượng tham gia vào thị trường này.
Agreeing with the viewpoint, but the General Director of the Westlake International Tower Joint Venture Company said, if the draft law expands the scale of real estate business activity for foreign individuals and organizations as well as Vietnamese overseas, it's necessary to have supervising mechanism and investment orientation to attract investment effectively and not affecting the cultural.
Tôi nghĩ rằng chúng ta nên khuyến khích họ và định hướng họ, giới hạn họ vào trong các dự án phát triển các khu đô thị mới. Còn những cái dự án bất động sản có tính chất nhạy cảm như trong các khu vực phố cổ hoặc trong các khu vực có nhạy cảm về văn hóa thì tôi nghĩ rằng là chúng ta nên có các quy định cụ thể. Như thế nó sẽ vừa chúng ta tận dụng cái kinh nghiệm phát triển về các cái đô thị mới của họ và cũng như các cái sản phẩm chất lượng mà chúng ta vừa khơi thông một dòng vốn mà vừa cũng như là đảm bảo hài hòa lợi ích giữa nhà đầu tư và cũng như là chúng ta giữ được những cái nhạy cảm về văn hóa giống như các cái khu vực mà đầu tư nó các cái động trạm.
The foreign investment capital into the real estate sector is considered to be an important support for realty projects in Vietnam. This new point in the revised draft law on real estate business is said to be suitable with the amendments in the coming law on investment and to boost the recovery of the real estate market.
As usual, the final part is the summary of the local security markets in the week ending April the 6th. And that's all for now. Thank you so much for your attention. For comments and feedbacks, you can reach us by email at intovietnam@vitv.vn or give us a call at 0422208288. Goodbye for now.